give you 5 extra seconds.
Okay.
All right. So everybody, we'll just give people a moment to file in and get their audio settled before we start today's webinar. Welcome. Okay, so I'll make sure that we have this typed out for people that are coming in a little bit later, but welcome to today's webinar. For those of you that haven't joined an ACRO webinar in the past 7 or 8 months or so, this is Zoom webinar, and it differs in a few key ways from the normal Zoom meeting if you've used that before. The first and most notable difference is that your cameras and your microphones are disabled by default, so you don't need to worry about interrupting us or anything like that. Any noise you have in the background is fine. But that does mean if you want to interact with us, you are limited to using type or text functions. So the first is chat. You can use chat for any kind of general discussion, comments, so on and so forth. But if you have a question for our panel today, we prefer that you use the Q&A function. You can ask those questions anonymously if you so choose, and you can see existing questions, you can thumbs them up, and you can add your own comments to them. So it's a little bit more robust and easy for us to manage if you put your questions in the Q&A. Also, just as a heads up that we have people from all over the world on the call today. So you'll have to mind since we are using our home Wi-Fi's. So hopefully there are no issues, but such as life during the pandemic. So I want to hand it off to Julia Finocchi to start. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're so glad you're here. I'm Julia Finocchi, Associate Director at ACRO, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Uzbekistan 2030, the Silk Road to Internationalizing Higher Education. As always, like Michael said, we are hopeful that our technology will not fail us. Like you, we at ACRO remain at the mercies of our home Wi-Fi. As Michael mentioned, using the Q&A, please note if there is a specific panelist that you would like to address your question to. In ancient days, the Silk Road made Uzbekistan an international destination. Now Uzbekistan is embarking on a 10-year plan with the goal of once again becoming an international hub in higher education. This webinar will be a Silk Road journey that begins in Uzbekistan's current international education landscape. Joining me today to take us on that journey are Anne Koenig. Anne is an associate director with ACRO. Her international education career spans over 30 years. She is the author of the EDGE profile on Serbia. Botir Drayev is joining us today from Uzbekistan. He is a senior English teacher at the Scientific Educational Center of the Academy of Sciences in Tashkent, Uzbekistan. Botir has participated in conferences and training programs around the world. In 2003-2004, Botir participated in the U.S. Department of State's Junior Faculty Development Program as a visiting scholar at Arizona State University, where he began working with Anne Koenig. They have been collaborating on their work in providing information on education in Uzbekistan ever since. Anne and Botir are the authors of the EDGE profile on Uzbekistan. You can read more about them on the homepage of the EDGE Uzbekistan profile. Anne and Botir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Julia. And Botir, would you like to say a few words? Introduce yourself. Say hello.
Hi, everybody. My name is Botir Juraev. Nice to see and nice to hear all of you. I'm an English instructor. This is my first meeting, webinar meeting. I'm very happy and glad to be with you. And if you have any questions at the end of Anne's presentation, I will be glad to answer all of your questions and give my comments. Good luck for everybody.
Thank you very much, Botir. Great to have you with us today. Thank you everyone for joining us today on our Silk Road journey through the educational system of Uzbekistan. This will be somewhat of a historical journey because there have been so many changes in the recent past. The death of the first president of the Republic of Uzbekistan, who was in power for over 30 years, has meant a change in leadership and new paths forward with a huge, strong emphasis on education and a view to internationalization. In this presentation, we'll talk about the most recent changes, plans for the future, and how ACRO is involved. So if we could just go back to the map, please, Summer, of Uzbekistan. There we are. Yeah, that's the slide. So just an orientation about Uzbekistan. It's in the region of Central Asia with many neighbors. Uzbekistan is about the size of the country of Sweden, or just slightly larger than the US state of California. It's a former constituent republic of the Soviet Union, the second Soviet republic to declare independence on September 1st, 1991. Uzbekistan has a relatively young population, which makes education a very important factor in Uzbek society. And the new president has really put an emphasis on education as the foundation of the future. The main languages are Uzbek and Russian, and Uzbekistan has a literacy rate of 100%. And as I mentioned, education is very important. And also, as you can see geographically, the population centers are mostly in the east and the southeast. So the areas to the central part of the country and the west are called the regions, and that's also an important factor in education in Uzbekistan. Thank you. Next slide, please. Uzbekistan has a highly centralized education system. It is a constitutional republic with a president and a cabinet of ministers that make up the executive branch of the government. Since the change in presidency in 2016, many things have been changing and changing rapidly in the sphere of education. There are 2 ministries for education. And in addition, the president has promulgated several decrees on education. The Minister of Public Education is very committed to providing internet access and very engaged in developing IT technology for education for all. Next slide, please. The ACRO Edge profile for Uzbekistan reflects the research and presentations that Bodor and I were working on back in 2005 and 2006. So we're in the process of updating it right now, but it's not quite ready yet. There have been a lot of changes, and even just in this academic year, partly planned changes and partly due to the COVID-19 epidemic. For today's webinar, I had wanted to at least show you a new updated ladder for EDGE, but I'm still in the process of getting confirmation from the ministries of some details of the most recent changes in the educational system. So the new EDGE ladder and the updates to the profiles are under construction, and they'll be coming as soon as we can get everything confirmed. But today I am going to show you 2 charts of the educational system, a sort of before and after, from a government report that was published in 2019. So next slide, please. The 2 charts that I'm showing you today are from a 2019 government report that's cited here at the bottom of this slide. This chart shows the structure through the 2016-17 academic year. And then in a moment, I'll show you a slide that reflects the current system. But basically, in higher education, the first level degree is the Baccalaureate or bachelor, and the second level degree is the Magister or master. In most fields of study, the Baccalaureate is a 4-year program, and the Magister is 2 years. There are some variations, which I'll talk about later. There haven't been any recent changes to the higher education degree structure. There are changes to the content and curriculum, but there are many changes and significant changes in secondary education right now, and that's what I want to focus on here. So when Uzbekistan declared independence from the Soviet Union in 1991, it continued to follow the Soviet system of education until about the year 2000. So that was an 11-year system in a 9+2 configuration. As part of a 10-year reform plan that started in 1999, it expanded the sector after grade 9, which is called secondary specialized education to 3 years, 9 plus 3, a total of 12 years. And that's what's depicted on this slide. That reform created two types of upper secondary schools, the academic lyceum and the professional college, both of which lead to the National Higher Education Admissions Examination. There are other options after grade 9 in the vocational training sector, which lead to terminal employment credentials, but not to higher education. Okay, in our next slide, we see the chart as it looks today, the current system, with changes that have happened to upper secondary education in two phases. The first phase started in September of 2017. Upper secondary education was reduced from 3 years back to 2 years. So that made the system an 11-year system again, 9 plus 2. And then phase 2 in September of 2019, just a year ago, a new type of school was opened, the General Secondary Education School. So that's one school offering grades 1 through 11. So students do not change schools. They stay in the same school for their entire school career. So now there are 3 pathways to higher education: the academic lyceum, the professional college, and the general education secondary school. Also, terminal vocational education is also being expanded because workforce preparation and employment are so important to Uzbekistan's future. So graduates of the academic lyceum and the general secondary education school now have options for terminal vocational training to obtain employment credentials. So those who are familiar with the Soviet system of education will recognize that this new structure looks a lot like the structure in the Soviet system, an 11-year system with a very extensive system of vocational training options. But the content and the curriculum are changing and are future-oriented. Next slide, please. So this slide gives you the chronological developments over the past 30 years of the structure of upper secondary education that leads to higher education admission and the names of the completion credentials. The list does not include terminal vocational training after grade 9 that does not lead to higher education. And there is a national higher education admissions examination given every year on August 1st. Now let's look at some sample credentials. I've got one set of samples from each of the 3 pathways to higher education. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, there are 3 pathways to higher education in Uzbekistan, and so we'll start with the academic lyceum. The academic lyceum is under the Ministry of Secondary, Specialized, and Higher Education. The cohort that entered the academic lyceum in 2017 is the first class that completed the 2-year upper secondary curriculum. So this diploma, awarded in 2019, represents that 2-year structure, 9 plus 2. Only about 20% of the age cohort goes into this type of a school. And it's important to know that an academic lyceum can be a standalone school or can be attached to a university, as we see in this example. This diploma is from the Academic Lyceum of Andijan State University. In terms of the document and the formatting, the diploma is a pre-printed document in landscape orientation, and it's pasted inside of a hardcover blue booklet. The data is filled in by hand by a calligrapher. It's issued with a diploma ilova, the diploma addendum, a grade report on paper that is printed back to back and folded to fit inside the diploma booklet. This type of documentation comes from the Soviet legacy, but Uzbekistan is working on digitizing its academic record keeping, and we will see in a moment an example of that kind of a document. Next slide, please. This is the diploma addendum for the diploma from the academic lyceum that we just saw. And the grading is on a 5 scale, 5, 4, and 3, with corresponding verbal grades. And I'll show a chart of the grading scale in a few moments. Let's look at the next document, the next slide, which is a brand new document. This is a new certificate that's being given to all graduates of the academic Lyceum starting this year in June 2020, so that graduates can enter the workforce in a recognized occupation. Boder provided me with some information about this new certificate. He said that about more than 500,000 young people graduate each year from the academic lyceum and the professional college. So in 2020, in order to help young people find work and get into the employment field, and also to support their families during the COVID pandemic, the government decided that they would start giving this kind of a certificate so that students could have a job opportunity. This year of 2020 has been as difficult in Uzbekistan with COVID as it has been for us, and has made things very difficult for the ministry offices as well. So beginning in 2020, this certificate is obligatory. It will be given to all graduates of the academic lyceum starting this year. And it's important to know that this certificate does not admit to higher education. Only the diploma from the academic lyceum admits to higher education. This certificate is solely an employment credential. Next slide, please. Let's move on to the second pathway to higher education, the professional college. And this type of school is under the Ministry of Secondary, Specialized, and Higher Education. This particular diploma, this example, gives us a nice example of an honors diploma pasted inside a hardcover red booklet. A regular diploma without honors is in a blue booklet cover. An honors diploma at any level of education is colloquially called a red diploma. And this terminology and this style of documentation again comes from the Soviet heritage. If you have a red diploma, if you say you have a red diploma, people know you have the honors diploma. And I noted that this particular diploma represents a 3-year program at the professional college. So I'm still in the process of requesting details and confirmation from this ministry about the professional college programs since the switch back to the 11-year system. The process for requesting information is very bureaucratic. And of course, the COVID-19 shutdowns have made it even harder to get information. Next page, please. Here's the diploma addendum, the first page of it. And let's go to the next slide so we can see the interior of that diploma addendum. This is the grade report that goes with the diploma from the professional college. And this is a photo fresh from Tashkent. Thank you very much, Boder, for providing this sample document for us. And here we see that all the grades, that's the right-hand column, are 5. Excellent. So thus, this student got the red diploma, the honors diploma. Next slide. So now we're at our third pathway to higher education. This is the new general education secondary school, the 11-year school. This one is under the Ministry of Public Education. So this document is also in booklet format, in portrait orientation. And this is a brand new document in the Uzbek system. 2020 is the first year of its issue. Some new features in the production of the document. We notice that the document does not have any handwritten entries. It's all typewritten. Also, it's trilingual, Uzbek, Russian, and English. Thank you, Uzbekistan. Spasibo, Rahmat. The orange arrows point out where the different languages are. It also includes a QR code in the bottom left corner where the pink arrow shows. That would be a QR code. On the right side of the slide is the interior of the document as it is folded into the booklet. The paragraph includes the name of the school and the year of completion. And this is also issued with an iloba or addendum, which is officially called a supplement in English as the grade report. For the 2020 graduating class, these certificates were delivered to graduates electronically because the schools were closed, and the paper version is stored at the school for the students to pick up later when the schools reopen. Let's go to the next slide, which shows us the supplement, the grade report that goes with this certificate. It is also a piece of paper that folds up to fit inside the booklet. It is also trilingual, Uzbek, Russian, and English. And in the listing of subjects and grades, we see that the Uzbek is in the left column and the Russian and English are together in the right columns. They both have the same number of subjects, but the column with the English and Russian looks a little longer because the words are longer. And again, we see the grading scale, 5, 4, and 3 in use, and with corresponding verbal grades. So let's go to the next slide, and that will show us the grading scale at the secondary level. It's used standard in all levels of secondary education, all types of schools. So that was a quick overview of secondary education. Let's go to our next slide and move on to the level of higher education. This is part of a sample document for a degree from higher education. And I just want to mention that the structure of higher education has not changed lately. The first level qualification is called the Baccalaureate. In most fields of study, it's a 4-year program. But the degree given in the fields of medicine and dentistry, which have longer programs, is also called Baccalaureate. It is the first level higher education qualification in Uzbekistan, no matter what the field of study. So this sample shows us a program in design from Tashkent Institute of Architecture and Construction. The left-hand side is a copy of the original diploma awarded in 2014. On the right-hand side is the copy of the first page of the diploma addendum, which gives us information about the dates of enrollment and the field of study. This program was completed from 2010 to 2014 in the field of design. And the diploma was issued inside of a small hardcover booklet, just like the secondary diplomas we saw before, but the higher education diplomas are in portrait orientation. Let's look at the next slide for a copy of the diploma addendum. I just want to show this to you quickly, and we'll come back to it later. And then the next slide is the final page of the diploma addendum. So this sample that I just showed you of the Baccalaureate represents the documentation format through 2019. Beginning this year in June 2020 with the 2020 graduates, we start to see some new features in the documentation. Let's take a look at the next slide. So this is a brand new Baccalaureate issued in 2020, this year's graduating class from the Uzbekistan State World Languages University. First of all, notice the name of the credential. The nomenclature has changed. The credential is now called Darajasa, degree, rather than diploma. The basic layout of the document is the same as previously. It's bilingual Uzbek and English, but there are several new features. Notice the degree is typewritten, or the document is typewritten, not handwritten, no handwritten entries. It contains a QR code down in the bottom right corner for online verification of personal data. And on the right side of the screen, the oblong image you see there is a screenshot of the verification result based on the QR code. So the verification result includes the name of the student, the name of the university, the name of the faculty, the field of study, the group in which the student was, the qualification, the years of enrollment, and the diploma number. Isn't that cool? All right, and this is especially important to be able to verify these documents online, especially now during the time of COVID, when the documents are, when the databases are being created now electronically. So that this is going to be something that facilitates not only the recognition of these diplomas within Uzbekistan and the verification, but also a very important part of internationalization. Next slide, please. I wanted to show you this as an example of a medical degree This shows the provisional certificate for a degree in general medicine, which is also called a baccalaureate, and it's a baccalaureate darajat, baccalaureate degree. It's a 6-year program of study, and this one was just issued in April of this year. Let's see. I was going to give you the whole translation. Basically, it's saying that it is a provisional temporary certificate for a diploma that will be issued later. Okay, next slide, please. This is the higher education grading system, and this has changed recently too. Previous to 2018-19, the system used is called a rating system. We'll look at that in just a moment. But starting with the entering cohort, the first year cohort in the bachelor programs, 2018-19, they're going back to a system of using 5, 4, and 3 that correspond to verbal grades. So let's take a look at, in the next slide, at this very complex rating system that has been in use. And I can remember Botir commenting to me back when this was first started that not only do we find this to be a complex system, but that even within Uzbekistan, they found it to be very complex. So I'm not going to read the whole slide, but I'm just going to say that it's very similar to the system of Indian marks. Each subject has a maximum number of points, or using the Uzbek word bal, meaning points. And to calculate the student's grade as a percentage, you divide the number of points the student has achieved by the total maximum number of points in the subject. And that's how you arrive at the grade. Then at the end of the program, you add up all the maximum points and all the points the student has achieved and do that mathematical conversion again to come up with a percentage. I'm going to show you an example of this in a moment. Let's go to the next slide and look at the BAL system. So the BAL system is the points. That's the maximum number of points available in each subject, and then the number of points the student has received. So there are some things that make this BAL system very complex, but one standard thing about it is that the study plan, the curriculum for each specific field of study or each specific degree area is the same throughout the whole country, so it has the same number of BAL. But what's not standard is that every program of study has a different number of BAL. And Julia and I were thinking of it as this system is as complex as the complicated tile work you see in this slide in this beautiful building along the ancient Silk Road. So let's take a look at this rating and BAL system in action. Next slide, please. Going back to the diploma addendum from the bachelor degree in design that we looked at earlier. That's from 2014. So here we see, this is the interior of the addendum. This is the grade report. We see that there are 3 columns. The column in the green box on the left is the subjects. The red box is the maximum number of points for each subject. And the blue box is the number of points the student actually achieved out of that maximum number. And at the end of the document, you get your total of the maximum number of points and the number of points the student achieved. Next page, please. Next slide. So this is the final page of the addendum where you add in the number of points that are shown on the top right. That's for the practical training and the state attestation exam. And then in this case, there's also a final design project. And the complete and total number of points the student achieved are divided by the total number of points available, and you arrive at a percentage grade of 85%. So this is the very complex rating system. And when Julia and I, well, I'll talk a little bit later about Julia and I speaking with our colleagues in Uzbekistan about how this can be a deterrent to international recognition, because this kind of a system is not used very widely except in the Indian mark system. So that was a very quick tour of the nuts and bolts of the Uzbek educational system, the structure, and some of the documents. Now I'd like to go into talking about internationalization. So next slide, please. So now that we have some background about the system, the structure of the system, and the nuts and bolts, let's look at internationalization. Let's take a look at the situation there and ask why. What are some of the challenges that are faced? And I want to thank Botir again for all the background information he's shared about the demographics, the social context, especially with the new president. And to save us some time, I'm going to just summarize a lot of these things quickly, and then we'll have time at the end for questions, and Botir can give his input as well. So thank you, Botir, for helping me with all of this information. So internally within Uzbekistan, there are demographic challenges that need to be addressed in order to improve education. I mentioned already the very young population. I mentioned the fact that Tashkent and the large population centers are mostly in the east and the south. And then there's this large area of the country that is called the regions. And that can be a challenge as far as especially internet connectivity. And let's see. And the new president, Boter was telling me just before we met today, really talking about how the new president is really leading the way as far as laying the legal foundations for changes in the educational system, social changes, and the components that are most important for smoothing the pathway to international engagement. So I'll be highlighting some of the changes that are most of interest to us as international admissions and credential evaluation professionals. And then I'll tell you about how ACRO is involved in some of these developments. So next slide, please. So just to give you a little bit of background on the legal foundations of education, there have been several presidential decrees and a new law on education. The decrees set the stage for the roadmap for 2030, and the 2020 law on education establishes the legal framework for everything. And all of this has been going on at the same time. The law on education has been in the process of being developed throughout this whole process over the last few years, and then it was finally signed and went into law on September 23rd, 2020, really just a few weeks ago. Next slide, please. So here we have some concrete examples of the activities that are going on in Uzbekistan right now as they begin their roadmap to 2030. And Botir again was telling me about some of the changes, comments by people he knows, by colleagues he works with, kind of what the general thought is in the country. So that's all really helpful background information. With regard to the higher education institutions, the number of those and the quality of those are increasing. That's a big goal. Another big goal is more study places for Uzbek students who qualify for higher education, and also to get higher education institutions into the international institution ranking listings. Also institutional partnerships and agreements between institutions. And one new thing is that secondary graduates will be able to apply to more than one institution. Higher education admissions are coordinated centrally on the basis of the National Higher Education Exam. We mentioned earlier that the grading system in higher education is being reformed. That's something for us to watch. And also a big one for us to watch is for the planned gradual transition to a credit system for the bachelor and master degree programs. And we'll have more information on that shortly. So let's go to the next slide and focus on institutions. Well, the Ministry of Higher and Secondary Specialized Education is the ministry that oversees higher education in coordination with other ministries that are responsible for specialized institutes, such as the Ministry of Health, Agriculture, Foreign Affairs, and Justice, for example, and also the Cabinet of Ministers. So this is the ministry's webpage for listing and confirming the status of higher education institutions. It's an interactive graphic map. You can mouse over the map to get a link to the region. The higher education institutions are listed by region. And this particular slide shows you the Google English translation of what you get when you use the Google English translator. So I did this screen capture about a week ago, and Boder informed me this morning when we were speaking earlier that there are currently 130 higher education institutions. So there are several new ones that have opened this year, and usually around September 1st is when the paperwork is signed officially to open the institutions. So one of the things that Botir and I were talking about is that this website is not usually up to date. It takes them a while to get things updated. So on the let's see, you can see the different types of institutions that are operating in Uzbekistan: universities, institutes, academies, branches of public universities, and then branches of foreign institutions, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, and non-governmental or private institutions. And this list does include the branches of foreign higher education institutions that are officially permitted to operate in Uzbekistan. Let's look at the next slide, and this just gives us another link to finding institutions, and this is by type of institution. But again, you're going to use the interactive map to click on the region. So it's important to know the region of the institution you're looking at. Next slide, please. This gets us to the foreign institution branches. So Uzbekistan has had international relations with a number of countries, especially in Asia and Europe, including many that have opened branch campuses of their education, their systems, higher education institutions for a long time. Students in Uzbekistan have the opportunity to experience the educational philosophies, teaching styles and methods, and the learning and assessment processes offered in several different countries without having to leave home. These institutions have been set up by decree of the president of Uzbekistan. Each one offers education according to its own system of education in the home country, following its credit and grading system. And it's an important part of these agreements that the resulting credentials be nostrified in Uzbekistan. Nostrified or nostrification is the process through which credentials are officially deemed to be accepted legally for use in Uzbekistan for employment purposes or for further education. So for the program that's offered in Uzbekistan, there might be additional requirements that would not be required at the home campus, or there might be special provisions for the use of the credential in employment or professional settings, for example. But when reviewing these credentials, we need to check the program's websites, both in Uzbekistan and at the home campus, if we should have any questions. So as of September 22nd, there were 22 branches of foreign higher education institutions operating in Uzbekistan. And there might be more now. Boder might be able to confirm that for us. But Webster University, Tashkent, Webster University, a US university, is one of the newest kids on the block, having opened its campus just a year ago, although discussions and planning for it had been in the works for a few years. Next slide. Another new development or growing development is international relations between institutions with neighbors, partners in the region of Central Asia and Asia, and also more recently with Europe. So to confirm information about partnerships or joint programs, joint degree programs, the best source of information is going to be the institution's website. And there's one really exciting development on the US side of international partnerships. Next slide, please. American Councils is back. American Councils is the American Councils for International Education, and they had been closed by the Uzbek government in 2006. This is the program or the organization through which Botir did his year in the United States here at Arizona State University in the area where I live, and that's how we met. But in 2018, after 13 years, American Councils became the first U.S. NGO to be certified by the Uzbekistan government. So for those of you who are from U.S. institutions or organizations, American Councils in Tashkent is an excellent contact point for reaching out to Uzbekistan. The list on the left side of this slide shows you the various programs that American Councils offers, and you can go to their website for more information. Next slide, please. Another great contact point is the U.S. Embassy in Uzbekistan, and that is the home of Education USA in Uzbekistan. So Botir confirmed that the embassy is closed right now for walk-in traffic, for personal traffic, but they are answering the phones, answering email, offering fax services. So just like here in the US, you still can contact them. Okay, next slide. So this is just a press release from Tashkent Tashkent Medical Academy, talking about the number of new universities that are planned to be opened this year. It's sometimes the Ministry of Education website is not always the most up-to-date source of news, but you do find information about new programs, new agreements on university or institute websites. So be sure to look at those too when you're confirming information. And also Botir mentioned that the local news sources are also good sources for information. Most are in Uzbek, there are many in Russian and few in English, but you can use the Google Translator to read the news. Next slide. So this slide is about the future plans for creating a credit system in Uzbekistan. And this is where ACRO comes into the picture. So as I had mentioned earlier, the branches of foreign higher education institutions that are operating in Uzbekistan operate according to the systems of the countries of their home campuses. So currently, there are already institutions using the Russian credit system in Uzbekistan, the ECTS credit system, the UK credit system, and now with Webster University's Tashkent campus joining the higher education community there, now the US credit system is in use. And some Uzbekistan institutions or departments have started using credit systems already themselves. So for example, Tashkent State University of Law announced recently that it's going to start implementing the ECTS credit system. So earlier this year, Webster University Tashkent reached out to ACRO for help in preparing an informational conference on what a credit system is all about, intended for Uzbek ministry leaders and higher education institution-based administrators. Colleagues from ACRO, including Julia and me, we gave presentations on the US credit system, its origins, and how it functions in the US higher education system, and how it supports international education. Julia and I focused on the function of a credit system as a tool for quality assurance and global currency, and we presented the variety of credit systems already present in Uzbekistan and illustrated how the complex and non-standard system of rating and BAL that's used in Uzbek degree programs could be a barrier to student mobility, and how wonderful it will be for Uzbekistan to establish a standard credit system that can be coordinated and correspond to credit systems already in use around the world. This conference was conducted by Zoom in a seminar and workshop format, and we did pre-recorded sessions, and there were Zoom breakout rooms for discussion. It was just excellent. So Webster University Tashkent is now working on the next step in helping the Uzbek government leadership develop a plan for implementing a credit system. And again, I want to thank our colleagues at Webster University Tashkent for the wonderful relationship and partnership we have with them, and also for sharing some of the sample docs that you saw earlier in the presentation. And I also would like to thank our colleague, Botir, again, who has been our man in Tashkent, feeding us information and helping us with resources in Tashkent for quite a long time. Okay, and next slide, please. So just to conclude the informational part of the program, Uzbekistan is in the process of change, addressing its internal needs through developing secondary and vocational education for young people, growing its higher education sector, both internally and looking outward across borders to benefit from the examples of higher education systems in other countries, and by participating in internationalization efforts. There really is a lot going on, supported by a lot of technological development and the journey along the Silk Road. We hope that this part of it has been helpful to you and given you some new information. It's definitely the beginning of the journey for the roadmap to 2030 for the people of Uzbekistan, just the beginning. So thank you everyone for your attention. I'd like to turn it over to Julia now for questions and answers, Q&A, and Botir and I are both available to help as we can. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Anne. That was wonderful. We do have a question in the Q&A, and Botir, I know you replied to one question, but if you could reply to all panelists and all attendees, that's just copy and paste that to all of them, that would be great.
Okay.
The first question we have is from Denise, and she asked, does the Uzbekistan government make available any funding to their students that would like to study overseas? If not,
just try to sorry for interrupting, Julia. I
that's
just
okay.
tried to type in. Yes. New government of Uzbekistan, which is probably currently making some available different type of funding, especially for the field of education parts like art, sport, music, and culture. They already signed some agreements, mutual agreements and international agreements. In previously, I already told about it to Anne Koenig. So one of the reasons of funding, because this is proportionally dividing of the students and talented people to study out of country. If they proportionally realized, for example, in the field of art, music, culture, and support, in the near future, there will be enough people or enough staff for teaching and promoting this field. Before or in the previous regime, government used just their own funding. For example, they supposed in the previous, they supposed to take test, general test, the second test for knowledge speaking foreign languages. Now it's totally different. First, students or those who would like to study or to train out of country, they submit their documents related which country and which field they would like to train their skills. The commission of the government from the experts, they gather all documents and try to interview with talented and applicants. After the decision, the committee suggests the government how much money and how much, for example, time will take to support these students. This is shortly, briefly, what is going about the funding. But besides, there are some opportunities for the talented students. In Uzbekistan, 45 embassies of the foreign countries. Most of the embassies, they suggest their own scholarships and funding system. As I know, the main example for this the United States Embassy. They suggest several scholarships and exchange programs for the students, even for the students, those who study at school. I think that is enough.
Good, and I would like to reiterate, thank you so much, Botir. I would like to reiterate for those of you who are in the U.S. or U.S. institutions or organizations, the U.S. Embassy in Tashkent or American consuls are both good contact points to learn about what opportunities there are for students in
Definitely.
Uzbekistan, and also American consuls is in Central Asia, the whole region.
Right.
We have a couple of questions from Miguel, and he asks a question, and Botir, maybe you could respond to this. What
Okay.
does literacy exactly mean? Miguel says, I've lived there for some time
All
and
right.
really
I'm ready
question
to
literacy.
answer. According to the very outstanding American scholar, Donald Hirsch, probably some of you know about him. I'm not sure about his life, present life. He used to live in Virginia. As far as my elder brother worked with him for the 9 months during his visit to United States, according to the United States Scholarship Program. And that professor issued just a book related literacy. Since that time, most of the scholars all over the world referred for this scholars term of using literacy. So according to his parameters, let's say the literacy is important part of the education. For example, how can we check the person is illiterated or literated? If the person can speak, can write, and can understand, this is the one point. If the person can see, can hear, can write, but cannot explain or cannot clearly follow the instructions, we say this is not literate person. So according to his explanation, or according to the Wikipedia explanation, there are some principles of literacy. The person who asked me about it probably knows in the Soviet regime, the most part of the people, those who live in Soviet Union, graduated 97% of literacy. After the Soviet Union collapsed, the system totally changed. Now we have opportunity to evaluate our access and our assessment own. Some experts can use Donald Hirsch's parameters or principles. Some people use their own survey how to evaluate literacy. But I think Donald Hirsch suggested very simple and very clear point to attitude of these parameters. So as for literacy in Uzbekistan, this is very interesting and very difficult, for example, problem. Why is interesting? As far as several years ago, I participated in the literacy meeting. It was in Turkey, Ankara. So I would like to mention that there were some people from the world, and they also asked about the literacy problem in Uzbekistan. According to the last, let's say, survey, it is difficult to analyze how many people literated in Uzbekistan. Why? There is no private organization or trainers, experts who can evaluate as Donald Hirsch parameters or Donald Hirsch principles. In order to understand, some people should read his book or some people should use his methods. That is what I want to say.
Thank you. Anne, Anne, you're muted.
And thank you, Botir. And I just wanted to interject that the source of the statistic I gave for the literacy was from the CIA fact book, and that the the 2020 edition is the one that's online right now. So that's where that statistic came from.
Mhm.
Thank you. And I think we have time for one more. We have a question about more use of technology in education in Uzbekistan and how that correlates with handwritten graduation papers and transcripts. And followed up by the question of, can we actually trust those statements from the Uzbek government information sources?
Well, let
Good
me answer.
question. As I
Yes,
already,
Botir, may I
yeah,
answer first
please
quickly?
go
and then
ahead, go ahead.
and then I'll give the floor to you. So
Okay, okay, okay. Sorry.
my summary
Okay.
answer, is that this is just the beginning. And I would say, look at the developments in electronic technology for education in the United States in the last year since COVID, how quickly systems are developing, etc. But in Tashkent, or I mean in Uzbekistan, this is the beginning. And Botir was telling me before we met today about how the new president is really really committed to information technology and digitizing everything. But we're seeing it's just the beginning. This is the 2020 is the first year where we're seeing these digital
Dahshat
documents.
solar today. What is?
Okay, Botir, take it away.
Sorry. I would like to mention that the name of the author, Donald Hirsch, the name of the book, Cultural Literacy, What Every American Needs to Know. Hopefully, you are familiar with his book. Includes 1,000 essential names, phrases, dates, and concepts. Cultural literacy, what every American needs to know.
I put
Donald
it in.
Hughes
I put
Jr.
it into the chat.
I can show his book if you would like.
I put the title in the chat, Botir.
I
Botir,
want to show
oh,
you
good.
his book. Can you watch? Can you watch
Yes.
his book?
Great.
Yes. There are a couple of questions that we have that I'd like to answer for the whole group that were in the Q&A, and Botir did answer them, but I think it's important as credential evaluators that we address these here. And the first, these are from Margarita, and she asks, are post-secondary transcripts issued only once, such as degree certificates, or can the student obtain
Yes.
multiple copies of these?
Yes.
So I know you answered that, Botir, and you said, yes, they're only issued once, and that's why they shouldn't lose them. And then the next follow-up question to that was, if they can be issued multiple
Of
times,
course, they can
they be
make
issued?
it copies.
Right. Okay.
Mhm.
Go ahead. Yes, so they
I
can
would like
get
to say
copies
one
of those.
thing. Okay, yes, copies in case if it happened in the accidents or in the fire or during some kind of damages, like, you know. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes. Mhm.
Okay. Like if they lost their documents, they need to verify it. Of course, they can make copies when they will mention copies to add the real, for example, amendment or transcripts. They should be verified by the stamp or by the notarius.
So yes, they should be able to
what
get
I'm going
the documentation from their school, Botir, is that correct? Directly from their school?
Yes.
And then there's a question about the QR code.
I have
And-
already answered.
Okay,
Q
but
code,
could you
this
answer
is-
for everybody?
Okay. As for question about Q code, this is really legal issue. Only the Ministry of the Higher End Secondary Special Education has power. It doesn't matter is it state or private, as you know, because only the authority has such power. If the institute or university can do it, it is not easy to check or verify. As far as you know, that there are some authentic documents and fake documents. And the fake documents is very easy to download from the internet or to make copy from the real diploma. As for the ministry, they will check, they will collect, and they will stamp, or they will include each QR code properly.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
I do not see any more questions, and we are right at 3 o'clock. It is the middle of the night for Botir. So we thank him especially.
It doesn't matter.
for
I'm
joining
really
us.
happy and I'm really glad. The first time in my, how I say, life that this topic is very interesting and very actual for some people. I didn't even, oh, there is one more question, right?
I think we answered it about funding overseas. We did address that, I believe.
Okay.
I would also like to thank Anne for all of her hard work in putting this together and working with Botir to make it all happen. This is certainly one of the most valuable aspects of ACRO and and also the network of colleagues we can pull upon to support each other during these challenging times. Just a reminder that ACRO will continue to work for all of you, and we're here to ensure that we bring you the tools and information that you need to serve your institutions and your students in this dynamically changing environment. We know that right now you need to deploy every possible tool in your toolbox. Please visit our COVID practice pages. We have combined the resources and guidance pages into a single reference page that includes all of our COVID-related guidance, and that we're here to help. Also continue to check out ACRO Edge. As that Uzbekistan ladder is updated, it will be posted on Edge. And we thank you for joining us, and we hope to connect with you again soon. Thank you again.
Thank you, everyone.
Rahmat.
Thank you,
everyone.
Rahmat.
Arzum aydı. Thank you very much for your opportunities to giving me this kind of chance to respond on the behind of my family, on behind of my friends. I would like to say that this kind of presentation should continue in the future. Probably we should join some other experts from the embassy or from the leading universities. Hopefully, in the future, we will collect and publish or issue some kind of materials that will be very interesting. I know that we should update the information, but 90% of the information which Anne and Julia mentioned in their website probably still exist.
Thank you very much. Now get to bed.
Thank you so much,
So,
everyone.
Mike.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for
Bye,
bye.
everybody. Thanks for
Thank
joining.
you, everybody. Good luck. Thank you.